It's been a little while since I basically did one of these voter compasses, but, well, there's a federal election for Canada right now, and basically in less than a week, I gotta basically vote. So I figured, why not go to ISideWith again, check out the 2025 Canada Prime Minister quiz. See which candidates match your personal beliefs, so let's take the quiz. So, yeah, basically they're an independent, self-funded, nonpartisan voter education website, blah, blah, yes, I agree. Alright, so, Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, that's basically the voters' day. So, as you can see from like the time down here, about 4 days basically out. But let's just see how, like, I do with this, like, little quiz. So, education issues. Should the government forgive up to 20% of student loan debt? Now, I'll note that basically right now, Canada's basically not doing economically very well. This is probably a good idea, basically to try and get some entrepreneurs up and running though, so let's see what our stances basically are here. Yes, but only for Canadian citizens. Well, that's kind of obvious. Yes, but only for low-income students. Yes, and forgive all student loan debt. Yes, but only for students with excellent grades. No, we can't afford this. No reduced interest rates. Interesting stances, but whatever. I figured this one around though. Let's just press yes. Don't need to really look at this stuff. Whatever. How important to this me? It's somewhat important. Should the federal government put a cap on university tuition rates? So this might sound odd, but I'm actually not as much as keen basically on university education as I once was as a younger lad. The thing about university is that we're overeducating Canada, I think. I think I'll hit no here. And this is actually something I I'm a little bit more entwined about. The thing is we need to actually have less people actually being university educated in Canada, I think, and more people just being trained at work or going to trades and stuff like that. So yeah, it might sound a little bit odd, but it is what it is. Do you support independent schools? Yes. I mean, there's probably other stances here, but yeah, whatever. I'll note that basically right now our school system is not that great, and basically there's a lot of things I basically disagree with our public school system. So any independent schools is good. I probably even promote homeschooling at this point, just how bad the system is in Canada, but whatever. So that's all that. You can show more education questions. So should post-secondary education be provincial or federal responsibility? So honestly, I'm not really sure about this one. I mean, the thing is that post-secondary education really impacts the province, and it has to be funded by the federal. So yeah, that sounds about right. Put that down on less. Should low-income international students be provided with free education? Honestly, at this point, I'm going to say no. The thing is right now our education system is we've been providing education to I think Indians and stuff like that, lower fees and such like that. It really shouldn't be the case anymore, I don't think, because it's not really benefiting us. So just no. Not really that important to me though, but whatever. Actually, it's the least important thing. Should universities be held financially accountable if graduates with degrees leading to lower income jobs default under student loans? Yes. And honestly, we've been we've been having our universities basically promote a lot of things that really shouldn't be promoted in the university education levels. Unless it leads to an actual job that's actually profitable, it really should be something that these guys should be actually doing in the university. So yeah. All right, so that's the education issues. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who basically disagree or agree or whatever with like, whatever is this stuff, but our like education system is not quite great in Canada. I've seen like a lot of abuse of it recently, so yeah, this is what it is. So technological issues. Should the government regulate artificial intelligence to ensure ethical use? So we do a lot of regulation in Canada, and there's definitely a lot of concerns with it, so there's no stances here. So I'm just going to put yes. The thing about like, artificial intelligence is that it basically has like, so much of a gray area to basically be exploited that we just don't know. So we really should be regulating it a little bit. Should the government mandate the large tech companies to share their algorithms with regulators? I really don't like, government oversight in some things, so no. No. I'm kind of tempted to say with serious regulations, but that can be abused, so I'm just going to say no. The thing is, like, you don't want to be like, opening the door for abusive stuff, so just no. Should the government implement stricter regulations on the use of cryptocurrencies? Yes. And this is like the most important thing. I'm not going to basically say why this is, but I'll say I have like, personal like reasons basically for like, why this be done. I have lost money in the cryptocurrencies, by the way, in the market, so it's just one of these things that I think like there should be stricter regulations on it. Should RS be held to the same reporting and disclosure requirements as hedge funds, mutual funds, and public companies when selling their artwork? Yes. What are your stances here? Yes. Just, yes. It's not an important thing, I don't think, but, yes. Should the government impose stricter regulations on the collection and use of personal data by companies? We're getting to that point where, like, our data is basically out there. Let's just say here for our stances. Nope, nothing here. The thing about personal data is that basically it's just so open and out there, but there is a lot of stuff that you're like, you won't be very concerned about. I'm going to say yes, but it's probably like the least important thing. No, I really shouldn't say that. I'll say it's least important. It's one of these things that, like, I'm sort of like on the fence basically for it. I'll say somewhat. Should citizens be allowed to secure their money in self-hosted digital wallets that the government can monitor but not control? I'm not really a big fan of like the government being able to monitor my money and stuff like that, so the thing is, like, you want to basically have it like, if it's being used, okay, but you want to basically keep the government out as much as possible. We're basically moving into a, the realm where, like, everything's basically going to be online like this. Here's the thing. I'll note that basically recently, like, during like the trucker protests that basically happened in Canada, one of the things that the government basically did was they actually, like, they basically stopped they froze the bank accounts of, like, protesters and stuff like that, and other, like, rather mischievous things that they, like, shouldn't have been doing. So it really shows that, like, the government already has a lot of control, so you want to be very careful of, like, any control they basically give them, especially when they, like, go after legitimate protesters like that. Domestic policy issues. Should there be more restrictions on the current process of purchasing a gun? Where your stance here? Yes, and ban all punk. No. Yes, but only closing the gun show. Yes. No, only for assault weapons. No, only for criminally and mentally ill. Yeah, maybe for that one. No, by increasing penalties for crimes, blah, blah. I'm just going to say no. I'll note that basically the Liberals have been like, gutting the gun policies and really trying to ban all guns already, so it's been going too far. So I'm going to put that the most important. They've been going overboard. Are you in favor of decriminalizing drug use? At this point, no. We've seen a lot of problems with fentanyl and stuff like that in Canada. I'm sure the states have made it known there as well. I'm just going to say no, and it's somewhat important. Well, it's more important. Should Canadian Aboriginals receive more government funds? No. I'm actually not against this, by the way. The thing about the Aborigines is that they basically are their own distinct people that we really don't govern, but they do, the thing is there's been a lot of abuses the Aboriginal systems and stuff like that, so yeah, it's more important. Show more domestic policy issues, sure. Should the government regulate social media sites as a means to prevent fake news and misinformation? No. There's other stuff here, but yeah, no, the government should not determine what is fake or real. That's not the government's job. They may not like it, but it's really not for the government to decide because they could abuse that, so no. Should government workers be allowed to strike? So I'll note that basically I work at Canada Post, and I have mixed opinions basically on this. The fact is we basically went on strike during Christmas of this year, or last year rather, 2024. And it really hampered the economy for sure, but also possibly our customers who basically came to us are probably not coming back. The thing is the right to strike is important, obviously, but it has to be used right. And I feel I have to wonder about our situation with our union basically right now at Canada Post. Yes, but only for non-essential services. Yes, but establish a labor court to preempt immediate strikes. I wouldn't mind having more stuff like this, so I'll go with this for now, and I'll say it's the most important thing. Do you support a national daycare policy? No. I'm going to say yes to this. It's pretty important that we basically have our kids basically looked after. Should it be illegal to burn the Canadian flag? What do you got here? It's obviously no, by the way, but no, it's violation of free speech. It's just a piece of cloth and hurt on what it should. Just no. In order to reduce energy costs, should the government nationalize or privatize the energy sector? I'm not really a big fan of this idea. There's both risks basically for both of this, and things the thing about nationalizing energy companies is that it's kind of hard to sort of manage them, and if you basically privatize them, there's no guarantee they won't turn into a monopoly and abuse their power as well. Privatize, I guess. And it's so important. Should federal government invest in urban commuter rail infrastructure? I'm going to say no to this. Definitely not a no for that, but just a no. I'll note that basically with urban commuter rail infrastructure, it'd be really cool to basically have trains in Canada, but we've gotten to the point where our cities are basically too big for it to really be invested in. We might be able to have lines basically going between cities and stuff like that, but not much more outside, I don't think so. Should Quebec be granted sovereignty from the rest of Canada? This basically means to become their own company, or their own country. I'll note that basically much like, think that Quebec basically should, be able to determine their own rights to self-determination, but basically if Quebec basically is granted sovereignty, it's basically it for Canada, so it is what it is. No. I'll put this right here. They have let the citizens of Quebec vote on it. I mean, it is what it is, but they have to be able to vote, determine themselves. Should the government pass laws to protect whistleblowers? Yes. We got our stances here. Yeah, yes. We want to basically have it so people can blow the whistle if something happens. Should the government elect or abolish the Senate? I think we have. I think we should have a Senate. I don't think we should abolish it. I don't think it should be elected, but I don't think it should be abolished either. It's going to sound odd, but I say leave it as it is just for now. It's not an issue I want to deal with, so just somewhat. Should social media companies ban political advertising? No. Political advertising is important. It doesn't matter where it basically is, so. Should the government reinstate the long-form mandatory census? Yes. Information is good. Now I'll say somewhat. Should the government increase funding to the CBC? No. I actually kind of agree with eliminating funding at this point. Or decreasing it. I was going to say no. It's not really important to me what happens to the CBC, but I mean, it's one of these corporations for Canada that I'm sort of wondering why it's still here. Should the government increase funding to the CSA, Canada Standards Association? I have no idea what that basically is. No. Just least. Should Canada become a part of the United States? 51st state reference, everyone. I really don't know what to basically say about this one, by the way, because it's one of these things where, pretty much everything that's decided by the Americans is basically going to impact us more so than what our basically our prime minister can basically do, and even our premiers and stuff like that. I don't like the system in the United States, but I'll say no. But it's really not important to me, really. Should teachers be allowed to carry guns to school? Well, I mean, we don't carry guns in Canada, so no. Not really important to me, but less. All right, electoral issues. So that's basically all this stuff from, what was it, basically domestic issues? Yeah, domestic policy issues. That was all this one. Electoral issues. Should foreigners currently reside in Canada have the right to vote? No. Unless you're a citizen, you shouldn't be able to vote. This is, go absolute right there. Should the minimum voting age be lowered? I kind of feel like this is like, one of these questions that like, I would like this in the past, but I kind of think no at this point. Just no. It's somewhat important though, but whatever. Should a politician who has been formally convicted of a crime be allowed to run for office? Yes. It doesn't matter like, if they've been convicted for a crime. Should Canada switch to proportional representation voting system? I'll note that basically I very much like the fact that we have a representative in like, Parliament that basically we actually personally elect, but recently I'm sort of wondering like, how like useful it basically is. For those who don't know, instant runoff is basically if like you don't have a majority of like, candidates who basically like, if you don't have like the immediate like, 50% of like people voting a certain way for someone, it basically makes the lower people and goes to like the next rank. So basically, if there's a candidate that has a majority of the top references valid, basically they take it. If not, they go to step 2 and they limit the candidate with the fewest votes and who has the votes the next like, person. So I actually prefer this idea. The thing is like, if we go to like, a proportional representative system, I'm not really sure it's going to be able to like, represent like, areas of the country like where I basically live very well. The thing is like it's going to represent the, population centers like, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. It's not going to represent like, anywhere else. So it's one of those things like, I prefer having like my own candidate because I can actually like, lay on them for stuff. Should term limits be set for the role of Prime Minister? I don't really care about this. I mean, if they want to be, if you want to be like Prime Minister, go for it. What's your stances here? Just no. Our system is good enough for what it is right now, so more. Should politicians over 75 years of age have to require to pass mental competency test? I mean, I kind of think this is a good idea. The problem is here is with this one right here is that like, while I do like this idea, will I be able to bar people who like, you vote, who you just vote in? So no, I'm going to say no to that. And, it's most important. I want basically whoever, wants to run be able to like, to run and not be like, bound for any reason. So yeah. Should political parties receive money from the government? No. I don't think the government should be handing out money to political parties. I'm not sure if this is the idea coming from members. Now I'm just going to say no. And this is important, by the way, because we don't want to basically have like, a system in like, the Americas where this all that money basically flows into like, campaigns ads and stuff like that. I want to keep it reduced. Should political candidates be required to release their recent tax returns to the public? I actually don't believe this is like, required. So no. I'm just going to say no. Again, that's most. Should there be a limit on the amount of money a candidate can receive from a donor? Yes. I don't think you should just like, throw money like, as a rich person against someone. There should be a limit. So yes, should not be bought by wealthy donors. Ban all political donations on publicly funded elections. Should corporations, unions, and nonprofit organizations be allowed to donate to political parties? No. Leave it to people only. That's less important, but I mean, no, it's somewhat important. Immigration issues. Should the government enact a stricter immigration policy? Yes. What else you got here? Yeah, it should be stricter immigration policy at this point. It's not too important, but I mean, it's something that I think should be like happening in Canada, where we don't have like everyone basically coming in at this point. Should immigrants from high-risk countries be banned from entering the country until the government improves the ability to screen out potential terrorists? I mean, I don't think you should be banned if, like, you qualify for getting in. I can see why, but what else you got here? Nothing. I'm going to say no. But it's not really that important to me. Should immigrants be deported if they commit a serious crime? I mean, this feels like a yes. If they're a citizen, I feel they should be like, tried as a thing, right? So I'm going to say no. It's not really that important to me though, so whatever. Show more immigration questions. Should Canada increase or decrease the amount of temporary work visas given to high-skilled immigrant workers? I feel we should probably increase this, but I'm not really sure. Actually, I'm satisfied with the current amount. We'll go with that. Not really important to me though. Should immigrants to Canada be allowed to hold dual citizenship status? So this is actually something I'm actually been thinking about recently. I actually do think that there should be like only one citizenship for a lot of people at this point. Like, you only should hold it like one area, so yeah, no. You're Canadian or not the other way around. Should the government increase or decrease the amount of temporary foreign workers allowed into Canada? Neither. Maintain the current amount. Not really important. Should sanctuary cities receive federal funding? I'm not really sure we have sanctuary cities in Canada I don't really care about, so no, and just like put it to least. Should immigrants be required to learn English? This is something that basically is like sort of like, what about French? So our stance is I feel like I have to add my own stance here because, yeah, like, should immigrants be required to learn English? That's only if, like, they're not moving to, like, Quebec. I mean, it is what it is. Like, we have French and English, so it is what it is. Not really important to me, but, whatever. Should immigrants be required to pass a citizenship test to demonstrate a basic understanding of our country's language, history, and government? I'm not really sure that really matters. No. I think if you're a citizen, you should just vote. But it's basically like, our country's language, history, and government, so I'm not really sure. What are your stances here? And I'll say yes. It's a basic understanding. No, most citizens couldn't even pass a citizenship test. Oh, that's nice. All right, well, that's basically it for those ones. Let's go to social issues. Do you support the legalization of same-sex marriage? Honestly, at this point, I wonder if I basically still do. This is one of these things that, like, you know, I think churches should have the right to refuse if they don't want to, like, you know, perform it. That's about it. I don't consider this to be, like, an important topic anymore, but, you know, it is what it is. What is your stance on abortion, pro-life, pro-choice? All your stuff down here. I think I'll say pro-choice, but it's just, you know, it's one of these issues that, like, seems like a dead issue in Canada, so whatever. Should gay couples have the same adoption rights as straight couples? Yes. There's really no reason they shouldn't have it. I'm not even sure about that, so, you know, people do what they want to. Should transgender athletes be allowed to compete against athletes that differ from their assigned sex at birth? No. I think there's been enough, like, issues with this, like, you know, this says they shouldn't be, like, able to compete against them. Should business be required to have a woman on their board of directors? I kind of feel that basically, like, you know, this shouldn't matter. You should basically be able to work with whoever you want to work with, so no. Yeah, basically, you know, the economy do what it wants to. Should gender identity be added to anti-discrimination laws? We're still in that, like, sort of gray zone where I don't think we should be, like, messing with this just yet, so no, not yet, but I'm going to say no for not yet. Not only like these are stances, I don't consider it too important, but, you know, this is one of those things where, like, you know, gender identity is basically one of those things that I think we need to wait a little bit longer before we do anything with it, so just leave it be for now. Should people under the age of 18 years old be able to receive gender transition treatments? Now, this is basically one of those things where, like, you know, can you transition, like, you know, as a young child? And it's a really big question because at this point, if you basically transition before, like, you know, you start getting, like, your hormone, like, you know, treatments and stuff like that, you might be able to, like, you know, avoid, like, you know, a lot of, like, the adrenaline that, say, like, you get as, like, a man if you transition to, like, female and stuff like that. So there's also, like, you know, another way around. What are your stances here? Yes. There has been issues by with this as well, so I think I have to say no for this. Unless, like, you're, like, you know, and I might go with, like, yes, but only for 16 years old. The thing is, like, you know, you have to be old enough to sort of understand the consequences of what you're doing. And it might suck for like, those under 16 because, they're going to have like issues with like, sports and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a difficult issue. So less important though. Should hate speech be protected by freedom of speech laws? No. There should be like, a clear line where you say like, it's just too far. Do you support the death penalty? I really don't know what to say about the death penalty. It's one of those things where like, if we're going to put someone away for like 20 years, it's like at one point you say like, is it better to kill him or stuff like that? Wow, they got this thing right here? Okay, whatever. I feel this is your yes or no question. And I will say yes, but I mean, it's one of these things where like, I don't really care about too much. Should schools be allowed to require mandatory diversity training for teachers and faculty? No. We do enough basically to our teachers. Supposed to hear our stances here. So, yes, and all schools should require mandatory diversity training. No. Yes, and immediately terminate any staff members acts of discrimination. No, and mandatory diversity training should be banned. No, diversity training should be encouraged but not required. Okay, I like this one. No, only for teachers or faculty members that commit acts of prejudice. I like that one even better. No, only private schools should be allowed to require mandatory training. Yeah, I think I like this one best. I actually somewhat consider this to be more important then, because I actually do think like if you do something wrong, you should be like penalized for it, but not necessarily fired. So yeah, somewhat. Should women be allowed to wear a niqab or face veil to civic ceremonies? It's one of these like culture things where I'm actually starting to wonder like we should be allowing it. And honestly, at this point, I feel like it's a culture thing, not a religious thing. So, should schools be allowed to require mandatory diversity training for students? What to do about this one? I kind of feel like yes, for students you should, just so that they actually understand the norms and stuff like that. I'll say yes, but that's about it. Should companies be allowed to require mandatory diversity training for employees? Well, obviously, like mandatory diversity training and stuff like that. I kind of feel this is basically up to like, up to like corporate decisions, so yes. Should major public events include land acknowledgement statements? No, I think we've done enough of that. Basically, this is like a thing in Canada where if you're basically on a land, let's say like, an Aboriginal nation, you basically like, note that basically you're on their land. But I think it's basically gone a little too far with some of the stuff, so this is somewhat important. Should terminally ill patients be allowed to end their lives via assisted suicide? I don't see why it shouldn't be disallowed, so. Should the military allow women to serve in combat roles? I think women should be able to do it if they want to, so... Yes. Should parents lose custody for intentionally misgendering their child? I kind of feel this is probably a no. But let's see what their stances are here first. Alright, well, somewhat. Should frozen embryos be considered children? Embryos are not children, so no. Alright, housing issues. Should foreigners be banned from buying homes in Canada for 2 years? I'll note they basically have like a housing crisis in Canada, so this is like an idea to basically stop it, so... Yes, but only if it's their primary residence. I think I understand the purpose of this, but you know, if their primary residence is basically in Canada, right? So I'm gonna say yes, and just be like, you know, simple like that. It feels like, you know, we want to basically stop the housing market from getting any more out of control in Canada, so we need to build more homes. So a temporary freeze, I think, is the best thing to do for 2 years. Should the government subsidize home buyers who make less than $120K per year? I feel this is like a no. I like this stance, but I prefer it to be a no. I'm actually tempted to go like this. Should the government subsidize building up 1.4 million new homes over the next 4 years? Yes. Get those homes up. I'm not bothered for this one, by the way, up here. The reason I'm basically suggesting like you limit the number of houses that can be bought by single person or corporations is so that, like, you know, everyone's gonna have a house. We don't want basically like, you know, land and like houses and stuff like that being used like, you know, to store value. So one per person basically. Put a limit on it. And then, yeah, build these up to give people a house basically to actually buy. Should homeless individuals have that have refused available shelter or housing be allowed to sleep or encamp on public property? Yes, to sleep but not to encamp. Yes, but only in designated areas. Yes, create more social programs to provide free food, clothing, and stuff. I'll note that for this one right here. The thing is, like, you know, if they refuse, like, you know, available shelter or housing, it could be because like they don't feel safe there. And I think it's a legitimate reason, so... Yes, but only designated areas, I think. That's the most important thing. Should the government increase funding for homeless shelters and services? I think we already do enough, so... No. And it's somewhat important, but you know... Should the government provide assistance to homeowners facing foreclosure? Nope, I think if you can't own a house, then, like, you know, that should be it for you, but whatever. Should the government restrict purchase of residential properties by foreign investors? Yes. The other stuff is here, you know, whatever. Should the government incentivize construction of affordable housing? Yes, we want affordable housing for people to actually own a house, so... Don't care about the yes right there. Should the government implement rent control policies to limit the amount of landlords can charge for rent? And by the way, just you know, Yeah, I'm going to say more. I was going to say like most or more, like, one if it's more or most. The thing about like, incentivizing construction of affordable housing, if you basically build housing, I think it'll basically eventually like, they'll get a high enough supply that basically it'll like bring down the prices, so it'll be fine. Should the government implement rent control policies to limit the amount of landlords can charge for rent? Yes, but only in areas of housing shortages. Yes, housing is basically right. No. No, no, no. I'm going to say no to this. The thing is, like, it doesn't really work, like, rent controls very well, so somewhat. Should the government provide subsidies for first-time homeowners? I'm actually one of these people actually, like, is sort of like benefiting from this, so I think it's like a good idea. The thing is, like, I can't afford a house right now, but I am trying to save for one, so getting a little bit of help doing that would be like great. Should the government impose a 1% tax on real estate owned by non-residents? I mean, yes. If you're not like, a resident of like, of a real estate, then you really should be on it. And it's just, more and more and more. Should new housing developments be required to include green spaces and parks? Yes, this is important, but to have like green spaces and stuff like that. So, yes, it's only some important though. Should the government incentivize construction of high-density residential buildings? Yes, all housing is good, pretty much. All right, current event issues. Should the Canadian government maintain its 25% retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods in response to U.S. tariffs? What are our stances here? I mean, retaliations is like, how good is this going to help us in the long run? Or how good is it going to basically hamper the U.S.? They can like take it off. I'm going to say yes, but I mean, it's just like, I'm not sure basically like, what a really good response basically here really is. Should Canada exempt critical industries like aerospace and energy from its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods? I honestly don't know. I'll say yes. I mean, if like, they offer reciprocal exemptions, then I'm good with it. Should the government use tariff revenues to directly support Canadian workers and businesses affected by U.S. trade actions? I'm going to say no to this. I mean, it sucks, but, we just don't have the money at this point. Our economy is in shambles pretty much, so whatever. Yes, but distribute it broadly to all taxpayers, blah, blah. All right, economic issues. Economic issues. Should Canada raise taxes on the rich? So yes, that's the question. So the rich pay more than the poor do, stuff like that. The thing is, like, if you basically tax the rich, they're just going to leave and, like, not come back, so. I do like the idea of, like, reforms. The thing is, like, it's like, loopholes and stuff like that to really need to, like, be cautious and stuff like that. Not really sure about lowering the tax rate, though. It's fine where it basically is. I'm just going to say no. Keep the current tax structure. Should the government raise the federal minimum wage? I'm going to say no. What are your stuff here you got? So, yes, make it a living wage. Yes, adjust it to blah, blah. Regardless, minimum wage standards should be adjusted by each group. No, limit all wage standards. No, this will only cause prices to increase. No, most minimum jobs are meant to develop experience, not sort of family. Unfortunately, it's not really true. I don't think this one here, but whatever. somewhat important to me, but whatever. Should the government make cuts to public spending in order to reduce the national debt? I kind of feel this is a yes, but I'm not really sure where. I'm going to say yes. I mean, it really sucks basically to say that, but there's a lot of services we really shouldn't be offering, I don't think, that could be cut. Should Canada raise or lower the tax rate for corporations? Maintain the current rate. That's less important to me. Do you support Universal Basic Income Program? UBI. At this point, it sounds like a really nice idea, but I'm not really sure it's all that beneficial. So, I'm just gonna say no. I like the idea of UBI, but it's really just sort of it feels like a pipe dream. That's not going to really help. So just no. Should welfare residents be tested for drugs? I mean, no. I kind of like this idea. If they have a criminal history, maybe just to get them off it. Not really important to me. That's actually the least important. Do you believe labor unions help or hurt the economy? At this point, I'm not really sure. I'm also going to say that labor unions are sort of hurting the economy right now than anything else, so it sucks to say that, but it is what it is. Just looking at the Canada Post Union right now, I'm not really sure it's basically benefiting the economy, basically going strike and stuff like that. So something needs to be done there, but I'm not sure the union's really fighting very well, for the interests of Canadians and district workers. Should federal government subsidize universal child care? Yes, for low income. Yes, but encourage stay-at-home parenting. I'm just going to say yes. And this is some important. Should there be fewer or more restrictions on current welfare benefits? Probably fewer. No changes needed is actually good enough. Should Canada transition to a 4-day work week? Studies have shown this might be a good idea, but I'm not really sure it's really needed, so I'm going to say no. Should the government break up Amazon, Facebook, and Google? This might be a good idea, but it's not really basically in our ballpark to really care, so I mean, it's somewhat important, but this is not in our our field basis to decide. Those are all American corporations, so we can't really break them up. Should Canadian citizens be allowed to save or invest their money in offshore bank accounts? I don't see why they shouldn't be. I realize why this is a bad thing, but it's honestly reported. It's fine. Should old age pensions be increased? Yes, but only for low-income pensioners. Yes, implement PISA, personal investment security account system. No, decrease it. No, but index it. I like the idea of indexing it to the rate of inflation a little bit more. The thing is, like, our old age pensions are just like, you have them, but, you aren't really benefiting if it, if it shocks to the economy and stuff like that. So, yeah. Should pension payments be increased for retired government workers? I mean, I'm going to say no. I don't think I need that much more of a pension, but whatever. And it's more important to me, but, should the government use economic stimulus to aid the country during the times of recession? I mean, it helps, but I'm just going to say yes for this one. And, it's somewhat important. No, it's more important. Should the government reduce public sector borrowing? No, I think it's basically fine where it is right now. Should the employment contribution rate for the Canadian pension plan be raised above its current 4.49% rate? I already pay a lot, basically, in, like, taxes, basically, like, just going by, so no. Should banker bonuses be capped at 100% of their pay? I mean, I kind of feel this should be the thing, but, in order to cap to like 20 to 50%, whatever. Nationalize the banks, hooray. But yeah, I think there should be like a limit where, like, you're earning enough. Not really a big issue for me. All right, foreign policy issues. Should the government increase or decrease military spending? Increase, decrease, increase. This should be increased regardless. So you can't increase or decrease foreign aid spending. Probably decrease this. We do enough, like, foreign aid. We need to start focusing on our military and stuff like that. Do you support Bill C-51, which expands local police and intelligence agencies' authority to prevent terrorism? I'm not really sure about Bill C-51, but just on the face of it, no. Should Ukraine join NATO? No. I think we have enough issues with, like, Ukraine joining, or, like, Ukraine joining us be like a big issue for us, so just no. And that's the most important thing, I think. We don't need issues with Russia. We don't need a Star War, right? So, do you support a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? At this point, I don't think this is very possible. So, it really is this one or the other, so just no. It's not really important to me, but, no. Should the government lift sanctions on the Venezuelan government? No. I think we have enough issues with, like, rogue leaders. Should every 18-year-old citizen be required to provide at least one year of military service? So, forced conscription. I'm going to say no. I mean, you should be able to do whatever you want to do. Should the government attempt to influence foreign elections? I mean, at this point, I'm not really sure. We seem to have a lot of influence in, like, our elections. I'm really tempted to say, like, influence public opinion. But no, I don't think we should basically, like, borrow, like, in other countries, like, elections like that. Should Canada maintain a presence in the United Nations? Honestly, at this point, yes, I think we should have it, but, I'm not really sure anymore. It's not really important to me, though. So Canada provide military supplies and funding to Ukraine? Yes, but I'll note basically if the States pulls out, we should stop. It feels like, with Ukraine here, by the way, if we don't basically provide them with aid, they're going to get run over by Russia. But at the same time, it's if it's a lost cause, is it a good investment to sort of give it to them? And it really sounds like horrible saying that, but I mean, it's just a reality of the situation, throwing good money after bad, so to speak. So more. Should the military use weapons guided by should the military use weapons guided by artificial intelligence? I mean, is this getting to that thing where yeah, probably. It's so important. You have to really take this into consideration. But yeah, it's there. Should there be restrictions on government arms sales to countries accused of committing human rights violations? Probably no. Accused. Saying accused. Yeah, unless you confirm those violations, I'm going to say it really should be a no. Do you support the government calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza? A permanent ceasefire. Honestly, at this point, I'm not really sure Gaza can continue existing at this point, so no, I think our government should stay out. Science issues. Do you support the use of nuclear energy? Yes. When you get over problems nuclear energy and stuff like that. Should the government fund research in genetic engineering for disease prevention and treatment? Genetic engineering for disease prevention and treatment? Probably yes. Should the government allow the commercialization of lab-grown meat? Yes, why not? If we can eat it, why not? No, I'm okay with this too. Should the government regulate the use of CRISPR technology for human genetic modification? I have no idea what this basically is. Unless they becomes an issue, don't really care. National security issues. Should the government implement national identification system to enhance security and prevent fraud? I'm going to say no. I would rather they want to stay out of things like this. So, should the government invest in artificial intelligence for defense applications? Yes, probably. See how it works. Should the government require tech companies to provide backdoor access to encrypted communications? No. No. Should the government use facial recognition technology for mass surveillance to enhance public safety? I feel at this point, we just can't trust our government for what they've been doing. So, yeah. Should the government ban its citizens from using cross-border payment methods like crypto to send money to relatives in OFAC transaction countries? So, all those places. Yes. I mean, it's too easy to put funds basically in the hands of terrorists and stuff like that this way. So, yes. Transportation issues. Should the government enforce mandatory GPS tracking in all vehicles to monitor driving behavior and improve road safety? Again, I don't like the government being able to get, in my business, so no. Not very relevant to me, but whatever. Should all public buses and trains run on electric power? Nope. I think we live in Canada. It may not be a good idea, so. Yeah, somewhat. Should the government increase spending on public transportation? Yes. I think we should have like about governmental public transportation and stuff like that. So whatever. Should the government impose stricter fuel efficiency standards on vehicles? Yes. I do actually believe that you should be, you should be able to make like cheaper vehicles for like fuel and stuff like that. So. Should the government promote the use of bicycles by expanding bike lanes and bike sharing programs? This is actually something that I'm wondering if it's really like great. So it's one of those things like bike lanes and stuff like that. We see them a lot in where I live in Halifax, but I'm not sure they're really benefiting as much as they're hindering traffic and congestion and stuff like that. So yeah. Should the government restrict the use of advanced technology in vehicles to maintain human control and prevent over-reliance on technology? No. I'm sure everyone fears like the IR robot type of idea, but I'm actually sort of for it. So. Should cities implement congestion pricing to reduce traffic in busy urban areas? So I'll note that basically London, there's a tax, I think, if you basically go into the financial district or stuff like that by car. So I'm actually not against pricing people out of busy areas. They can use other forms of transportation. So should the government require all new cars to be electric or hybrid by a certain date? No. I mean, if they're good enough, that's fine. Should the government subsidize ride-sharing services for low-income individuals? Ride-sharing. I mean, I feel this is basically not important, but I mean, I understand the reason for it. Should the government implement stricter emission standards for diesel vehicles? Probably yes. Should cities designate special lanes for autonomous vehicles? Yes, I think that'd be a good idea. This actually I think is a good idea because I wouldn't mind basically seeing more vehicles that basically are powered by their own things. So anything that helps them, sure. Should government regulate airline frequent flyer programs? I have no idea, so no. Should the government permit the use of drones for commercial purposes? Yes, I think if they have good purposes, why not? Should the government eliminate all traffic laws and rely on voluntary compliance? What? No. That'd be chaos, I think. Should the government prioritize the maintenance and repair of existing roads and bridges or building new infrastructure? So build new roads, stuff like that. Should government prioritize maintenance and repair over building new stuff? Fairly simple. There should be a balance. Not much more to say in that. Should the government increase penalties for distracted driving? Yes. I mean, if you're going to be driving distracted, you shouldn't be driving at all. Should the government provide subsidies for dealing with high-speed rail networks? No. I don't think we're actually building them, but Well, I guess if you have a high-speed network in cities, that might be okay, so maybe. Should government regulate the development and deployment of autonomous vehicles? Yes. I think it's important, but Only like a very mild yes. All right, healthcare issues. How much more is there basically here? We got like, a few more topics, but I guess it takes a while to get through all this stuff, I guess. So, healthcare issues. Should there be more or less privatization of hospital and healthcare services? Privatization. The dreaded word in, healthcare for like, Canada. I'm satisfied with the current system. That's all I really have to say. Should cities open drug safe havens? No. Just no. We see now like, bad that basically is. Should the federal government increase spending on healthcare? Spending on healthcare. At this point, I don't think we can afford it, so should preventative dental care be covered under CAS? No. I think we, it shouldn't be like, covered. I think that's just not great. Should the government require employees of large businesses to be vaccinated from COVID? No, I think that's basically enough. You shouldn't have to require this at this point. If they, if they want to be vaccinated, okay. If they don't, oh well. Should healthcare be a provincial or federal responsibility? It's currently provincial. I kind of feel it should be federal, though. And I'll go with this. That works for me, I guess. Should the government fund the World Health Organization? So, at this point, I don't really know. The WHO is basically like, it's been lampooned basically due to like the COVID and like stuff like that. I'll say yes, but not sure what to say about that one. Should medical boards penalize doctors who give health advice that contradicts contemporary scientific consensus? No, I don't think so. Doctors are scientists, by the way, so sometimes you're going to have someone who basically, goes the other way. So this is going to be how it is. Should the government ban the promotion of products? Actually, I should check here. Does it say like, I'm going I like this one right here. As long as doctors like say this conscious contemporary scientific message, I'm thinking I'm fine with it. So, should the government ban promotion of products that contribute to unhealthy lifestyles for young people, such as vaping and junk food? For young people, I don't really, mind if like we ban a little bit more because they're young people. I'm gonna say yes. Just yes. Should prescription drugs be covered on a universal healthcare plan? Yes. The thing about like, prescription drugs is it's just one of those things that, sometimes you're just going to need them, it's going to suck, but whatever. Should the government increase funding for mental health research and treatment? I'm going to say no for this one. I'm not really sure we need to increase like, funding for this sort of things, whatever. Should the government increase funding for mental health initiatives? No. I'm sure there's like other stances and stuff for this stuff here, but I'm not really sure we really need just like, stuff being done, so whatever. Do you support the legalization of marijuana? At this point, I really don't know. It's not really relevant to us anymore at this point. It's already legalized in Canada, so whatever. Do you support a single-payer healthcare system? A single-payer healthcare system. So, again, that's not really relevant to, like, Canada, but criminal issues. Should funding for local police department be redirected to social and community-based programs? I'm not sure it's really too helpful. I understand, like, the purpose for this, but, no. I figure it's good basically where it is right now. Should prisoners serving licenses for first-degree murder be eligible for parole hearing after 15 years? So, first-degree murder versus, like, the other ones. So, in the legal context for Canada, first-degree murder refers to the most severe types of murder defined as a planned and deliberate killing of another person. So, if you actually plan and deliberately kill someone, I kind of feel after 15 years, yes, but it's one of those things, like, I could see that being like one of those things where, like, maybe you don't want to give them parole at all, but 15 years should be enough. Should police departments be allowed to use military-grade equipment? They're police, not military, but I mean, if they have, like, have to go up against military-grade equipment, then yes. And we actually saw this recently in, like, Canada, in Nova Scotia, so I'm going to say more for that. Should convicted criminals have the right to vote? Yes. The thing is, like, it doesn't matter if, like, you're convicted or not, you should always have the right to vote. And that's just because if someone takes away your right to vote, by, like, criminalizing you, then you can't vote. So, yeah. Should government implement restorative justice programs as an alternative to incarceration? So, restorative justice. I'll say yes, but I also don't really care too much about this, but whatever. Should nonviolent prisoners be released from jail in order to reduce overcrowding? Under house arrest, I'll say yes just for now, but it's less important. Should the government hire private companies to run prisons? No, never. Private companies are incentivized to make money, which means they're incentivized to have many people convicted, so yeah. Should AI be used to make decisions in the criminal justice system? Possibly this might be a good idea. Should drug traffickers receive the death penalty? I mean, we don't have the death penalty, so yeah. I'm going to say no, but, the thing about, like, drug trafficking versus, like, other, like, serious offenses, it's not like they're actually directly killing them, but I mean, they're indirectly doing it, so it's terrible to say it, but I mean, I think they're better just, like, in prison for those, like, type of offenses. Should penalty for traffic violations depend on the driver's income? No. You commit a crime, you basically do a time. Environmental issues. Should the government increase environmental regulations of business to reduce carbon emissions? Yes, no, 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 no. Let's enforce existing regulations. That'd be great. That's just a yes. It's not really too important at this point, I think, environmental issues, so probably going to see a whole lot, at least less for these ones. Should disposal products such as plastic cups, blah, blah, that contain 50% biodegradable material be banned? I mean, at this point, yes, probably. But I really don't care. Should federal government subsidize the production of consumption of renewable energy sources? Yes. Again, I don't really care though. There's all this stuff right here, by the way. I like this idea here, but whatever. Should local governments follow environmental guidelines set by the United Nations? I'm going to say no. I feel like they should set their own, so. Do you support the Northern Gateway Pipeline project? Yes. I think I support pipeline systems, in general at this point. Do you support the use of hydraulic fracking to extract oil and natural gas resources? Yes. Not really important to me though. Should Canada allow logging of old growth forests? Yes, probably. Should the government allow TransCanada to expropriate private property for the construction of the Keystone Pipeline? At this point, we really do need to get this built, so yes, but this is necessary, so I'm going to put that as most, because why not? Should researchers be allowed to use animals in testing the safety of drugs and vaccines, medical devices, and cosmetics? I mean, sure. Oh, not for cosmetics, but Do you support the use of genetically engineered crops and foods? Yes, why not? Should the government provide subsidies for companies developing carbon capture technologies? Yes, and also increase spending. No, tax carbon emissions instead. I'm just going to say no. Should the government provide subsidies to taxpayers who purchase an electric vehicle? I'm going to say no. Let people buy what they basically want to buy. Should the government build a network of electric vehicle charging stations? Probably yes, but yeah, only if you use renewable services would it be useful. Should cities be allowed to offer private companies economic incentives to relocate? Yeah, I really feel this is like a no. Should the government spend $1 billion on freshwater research to restore and protect large lakes and rivers? That's a lot of money, so no. Yeah, yes, but the $1 billion budget is too high. Whoop. I'll go with this one. And here we go, 2 more. Should the government invest in programs to reduce food waste? Yes. And should the government fund research in geoengineering as a way to combat climate change? Yes, I think. All right, so local issues. So basically I live in Halifax, so here we go. In 2025, Canada Prime Minister elections were held today. Which candidate would you vote for? So which candidate would I vote for? I love how they have the leaders, but not my local candidates, but whatever. If it's held today, And by the way, it's got 2 leaders down here because it's like the Green Party over here. But the sort of throw it out there. Yves Francois Blanchet is basically the Bloc Quebec law leader. Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative. Maxime Bernier is the People's Party of Canada. Mark Carney is basically the Liberal candidate, and Jagmeet Singh is the NDP candidate. For those who basically understand what the parties basically are. 2 primary parties that basically are like in the running here are Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney. So I probably vote for one of these guys. I'll say probably Pierre Poilievre just for now. I might vote Mark Carney on election day, but who knows? What's your top reason why you would not vote for Mark Carney in 2025 Canada Prime Minister election? So if I do this, yeah, basically why it's basically it's basically changing between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre because they're the front runners. They're the ones who have a chance to basically get to be prime minister. So, and I'll note basically here's the main reason. I prefer a minority government. I'll note that basically whenever we have a majority government, it really hurts my kind of post quite a bit. So I think we do prefer a minority government. So maybe I want to vote for the guy who basically has a better chance of causing that. So yeah. How would you rate the overall job performance of your current prime minister? The current one, way above average or above average. Why do you give this rating? I mean, it's pretty self-evident. He's doing pretty well for the country right now, and he's doing better than Justin Trudeau ever did. How would you rate the effectiveness of your current Prime Minister's policies in addressing issues that matter to you? Average. Just whatever. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's integrity and adherence to ethical standards? Average. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's communication with you and the public? Probably below average. That's something to note about Justin Trudeau. He's actually very vocal, but Mark Carney's not. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's success in implementing policies and programs that affect you? Average. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's management of economic policy and resources that impact you? Average. And a lot of this is going to be average, by the way, because I'm going to say below average for this one. And that's basically the main reason, what's he basically saying to our leaders? Because he's been doing a lot of that recently, so, average. So, rate your Prime Minister's communication and messaging during a crisis. So, it's just, average. I mean, it is one of those things where I would be concerned with it, but, he's managing pretty well. So, sort of averages out. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's clarity and openness into public communication? Way below average. Little to no communication from our Prime Minister. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's performance in ensuring your safety and security? I mean, given its circumstances, pretty average. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's communication of their vision and goals to you in public? Below average. And that's the thing. I don't know what he basically wants to do. Our Prime Minister has to be around long enough, but it is what it is. How would you rate your current Prime Minister's effectiveness in handling crises and emergencies that affect you? Average. How do you rate your current Prime Minister's responses to your needs? Average. Which qualities are most important to you in a candidate? So, I do believe that vision is basically pretty important. Diplomacy is pretty important. Common sense is pretty important. Other stances are what? Oh wow, there's quite a bit of stuff in here. So leadership is pretty important right now. Humility might be important. Strategy is pretty important right now. Government experience for him is definitely, as well as business experience. Electability is pretty important. All right, well, that's basically it for like, this like quiz. So that basically took me a little bit over an hour and a half as you do, but it's a long quiz, so that's to be expected. Let's see, basically like, pans out. So if ISideWith helped increase your understanding of politics, please share us with your friends. Share the quiz. No thanks. And I'll get that a little bit later, but I don't recognize the number, so whatever. All right, so basically here's where we basically lie right now. So elections. Here are the candidates ranked from most to least similar to your beliefs. So, Pierre Poilievre probably has like, as you see, the highest like rank. That might be because I basically like said I would vote for him. So common sense, communication, leadership, nationalism, right-wing assimilation, protectionism, deregulation, tough, meritocracy, and like, all sort of stuff. The feeling like, Mark Carney is that like, as a leader, he doesn't actually like, drive me, but, it's more so as the fact that like, the Liberal Party basically has an issue with me, but for the most part. And these guys don't even have anything down here. That's just funny, but whatever. So here are how some of your answers compared to our candidate's answers. So, should a politician who has been formally convicted be allowed to run? I said yes. These guys said no. Should there be more restrictions on the current process of purchasing a gun? I said no. Conservatives said yeah. Should foreigners currently residing in Canada have the right to vote? So I said no. They're sort of similar to these guys right here. Only Jeremy says like yes to that. And we gotta sort of like keep going down here as well. So you can see like, a lot of this is basically like conservative as well, but here's the first like, liberal one. Should the government subsidize the building of 1.4 million homes? I have no idea. So should politicians over 75 years old have passed mental competency test? He said yes. And they've like, just anything, but that's to be expected. So government restrict the purchase of residential properties by foreign investors? Yes. Should political candidates be required to release their recent tax returns? And yeah, you can see like a lot of these like answers here. For the most part, it seems like, for most part, like, all these like, stuff basically matches up with like, either like I completely disagree with like all of them like completely, or it's like, we'll see like the Alex Singh or like the R. Carney and like, most of this probably have for the most part. Mark Carney didn't say anything about like, burning flags, but whatever. All right, well, that's basically it for like, ISideWith. So you basically got to see like, where basically sort of like, land with like the candidates. Here's for parties, by the way. So parties, again, Apparently, like, it lands similar to, like, conservative, a little bit of People's Party, then Liberal. It kind of shows that, like, I was like more like, leftist basically in, like, past years, but slightly like more conservative, just as things like, go on. Ideologies. And if it loads, I'll basically like get to it, but do. It seems this, kind of low, long to load, I guess, this one, but whatever. So those are like my answers, we basically had. So you have 4 unanswered questions to answer since you last took this quiz. Well, I guess I'll answer those once. So should the government break up Amazon, blah, blah. At least the ones I basically said, like, yeah, we're talking more about that. So, well, that's basically it for, like, ISideWith. We'll see if basically, like, there's like one more, like, I want to basically do, but, that's good enough for now. So take care.